meeting to order. We can rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'll call roll. Tony Perugini.
Here.
Ann Harrigan. Ann Harrigan is turning in remotely. And Faith Ham.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, so any public comment?
We received no public comments.
All right. Next item on the agenda is a review of the minutes from our last meeting of May 19th, 2022. It's a long time ago. I assume we've all had a chance to review. Are there any, well, first of all, do I have a motion to accept the minutes? Mr. Perugini,
Motion
thanks.
to accept the minutes of the May 9th, correctly.
And seconds.
Okay, do we have any discussion, corrections, amendments, or anything to that effect?
And anything? No.
Okay, so all in favor of passing the minutes from May 9th, 2022, raise your hand.
Unanimous.
It's unanimous. Okay, so new business, titled Flexibilities for Implementing the CT Guidelines for Educator Evaluation 2017.
Planning. Yeah, downstairs.
We're
All the way downstairs. And it's conference room B if you follow the sign. It's a little of a maze down there.
So CT Guidelines for Educator Evaluation 2017 for the 2022-23 school year. So I'm going to hand that over to Ms. Salon.
So this is a continuation of what we have proposed the last 2 years. So during COVID, the state allowed us some flexibilities in teacher evaluation. We convened our committee, that is our professional development and teacher evaluation committee, which is made up of about 20 individuals in district, teachers from all grade levels, special educators. Mary sits on that committee, as well as a couple of other administrators. And we had sent them out this information and collected a Google form in which all 20 were unanimous in saying, we would like to apply for this again for this year. The side note here is that the State Department of Education is working on a new teacher evaluation system, which they have not come to conclusion yet because of all the parties need to agree. So we hope to be hearing more about that this year. But the feeling is that these flexibilities give us some nice opportunities, and that is there are frequent informal evaluations, which enables the evaluator to go into the classroom unannounced, which gets a truer picture of what's happening in the classroom. And it also, on the teacher side, gives a much truer presentation as well. And teachers have said they like it that the administrators can come in and they're not planning, hey, Tim, downstairs.
There you go.
And they are not, nervous and worried and, get scripted even. Yeah, planning something for the sake of, you're getting a much more realistic picture. And everyone is in favor of that. I will say for new teachers that we still have a lot of leeway to provide them support as well, because we can still look at lesson plans even though that's not a formal part of the process. So it gives everyone, I think, flexibility, and we found it to work well. So the process is that this would come before you all as the curriculum committee. And if you were to approve it, as you have done in the last 2 years, we would put it before the full board at our next meeting on the 15th. And at that point, I would then let the state know if it's approved there, that yes, this is something we want to move forward with.
Okay. I think before we begin any discussion, we put a motion on the floor, and then we can discuss during.
The proposed motion would be to forward the Cheshire Education Evaluation Committee's recommendation to implement the flexibilities for the CT educator evaluation for the 22-23 school year as offered in the law by the state.
Okay. Do I have a second? Thank you for doing
A second.
that. Okay. Well, actually, it was not formally said.
Well, no.
Okay.
That's a possible motion.
I
that
said that,
someone
what he
could-
said. Okay. All right, so discussion on this, and do you have any questions?
Yes, but you first.
You know, you and I spoke of this earlier, and I will say, I know that with every new or proposed change to the status quo, there's always a little bit of hesitancy out there, but I will say, in those years that I taught, this is how I was evaluated. It was never, you will be evaluated on this day at this time by this person. It was always almost spontaneous. And there were times, I confess, where I lost everything, and it was but at other times, it gave a very realistic picture of what was going on in the classroom. And I think that this is, personally, I think this is the way evaluations should be done, because you do get a true picture of just the talent, or weaknesses, or anything else that you need to work on with a teacher.
Right.
That would not appear if you had something really formal. So,
I appreciate that very much. In the old evaluation process, there are a few levels. So some people would be on a formal evaluation process that meant you had 3 meetings that were scheduled, and others weren't. You couldn't very well sustain everyone that you evaluated to be on that formal process. And the informal piece was there, but this just pushes it that much to be more informal.
Yeah, I agree with Faisa, and also because this is backed by the state and there's a structure, it's, I don't think people can take it as a subjective surprise visit, if there's a methodology to it, so I think people are more relaxed when it's informal.
Yeah.
And you probably, I would expect that most of our educators probably want to be seen in their natural form,
Yeah.
as opposed to, I have to I'm not saying they all, worry about the evaluation, but, sometimes you have a true picture when things are spontaneous and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
There are other opportunities too in this, outside of just the classroom, where there are informal observations during a collaboration meeting,
Sure.
or at a parent meeting, or at open house, or during a PPT. So they're infused throughout. They're called reviews of practice. And so those can take place in all of the non-classroom settings. So that's another area in which our evaluators can see where people need support and where they need feedback. Anne, any thoughts? Are the evaluations used to determine teacher salary? No. They are not.
So it seemed like it was years ago, but there was one time when Governor Malloy was still governor, there was a whole seat educator evaluation program that came up with categories to rank, he used the word rate, but to categorize teachers in 1 of 4
Yes.
levels, right? And I remember there being a lot of pushback from some unions, adoption others, but that never really went anywhere, as far as I could tell.
We do categorize based on developing,
Right.
professional, exceeding, what's the second one?
I forget.
Second one's developing.
Second one, below
Then
standard.
it's meeting.
Below,
Yeah, below standard is the first one, so there are 4 categories. For those for the first year, we didn't do the final rating, but for the last 2 years, we have done that final rating.
They were still required to do that.
Yes, we are.
And I assume this helps with that, and more importantly, get the professional development for the educators that can use it and, plan, so I wasn't sure how far along the seat was actually.
Yeah, no,
Good.
you're absolutely right.
So when you have a teacher who is at the below or developing levels, what strategies, what's your game plan, or what happens in those instances?
Yeah, there's a formal process in either of those categories, right, where we would put things into place. Some of it is called a support plan, or more, I think it's a formal support plan. So there are 2 real tracks. And that provides an opportunity for additional evaluations, or I shouldn't say evaluations, additional observations. so that the teacher can get that help and support. If it's, let's say, a planning issue where they're struggling with planning for diverse learners in their class because maybe they have some kids who have exceeded the standard and some kids who, maybe receive support or need additional work on a particular standard, you're helping that teacher to plan for, the edges. So it's really all in the name of support and what kinds of maybe professional development, maybe one-on-one support with a coach, maybe one-on-one with the evaluator, maybe going in and seeing someone else in the grade level across town, teach a particular lesson that you find difficult. Maybe it's looking at videos together, or us pairing them up with someone for a book study. It's very personalized to
Okay.
exactly what that teacher is struggling with. And then there's the part that says after, X number of weeks, days, if it's not getting any better, then is more support needed. And if it's still not getting any better, what happens? That's a rare bird.
For sure. And is there you answered one of the questions, which is, do you set timeframes by which they need to hit certain benchmarks and show progress? And
Yeah, there's usually like a 40-day timeline that also allows for, snow days, holidays, those kinds of things. I mean, the real spirit of it is to be genuinely supportive, because we've invested a lot in hiring a teacher.
Right.
We want it to work. We have a vested interest in making sure that the teachers that we hire are going to stick around and are going to be highly skilled.
Okay, great. And then you had said the state is going back and re-examining and recrafting their standards. Are they following this model, or is it still going to stay closer to the old model? And if so, are they going to still allow us this latitude? Or do we say they complete the process mid-year, do we have to switch over, or is this a year-long approval?
They wouldn't do it mid-year.
Okay.
There would be an extensive training plan, because they'd have to train all the evaluators in the state in the new model. I mean, they have to get unions on board, they have to get CAPS on board. I'm sure CAVE would weigh in. Like, there's a lot of players in this, and they've already convened groups around the state. This work started last year. There are notes and meeting minutes from it on the State Department of Ed website, but I don't know anyone who sits on, I haven't spoken to anyone who sits on the committee to know where they are. But it's usually a pretty well thought out process. And then if a district does not want that plan, they can petition the state and go forward and say, well, this is what, let's say, Cheshire wants for our plan. We had been talking over the summer, and I had shared with Faith that we're working with Kim Marshall, who is an educator who's nationally renowned, and we were intrigued by his evaluation system, and so that might be something that we entertain. And if that was something that we had consensus to move forward with, and I'm really purely using that as an example, we would write that up and formally submit it to the state and get approval to use that model versus another model.
Okay.
They gave that option also when SEED was adopted 9-10 years ago.
Okay.
Wow, is that long ago?
Yeah,
Okay. Do you have any further questions?
No, I thought the packet was very detailed. As I was going through it, I realized the categories are added to what you described at the seat side. So it's nice that it's not with something different in terms of flexibility. I think the flexibility, even when this first came up, was always a concern for all of you. So I'm glad this is helpful.
So, Ann, are you all set? Okay. So the motion says,
To forward the Cheshire Educator Evaluation Committee's recommendation to continue to implement the flexibilities for CT guidelines and educator evaluation for the 22-23 school year.
all those in favor? Okay.
Can I just say, I didn't hear that. Are we're voting to just pass this forward for more review?
voting to pass it to the full board for approval. This is the plan and that we've done for the last 2 years, and so we would be continuing that for this year as well. That's,
So we're not going to hear any more before we vote on it as a full board?
you would vote on it as a full board next when we present this to, from the curriculum committee.
Mhm.
We talked at length about, the opportunity to do more informal evaluations, but it gives the evaluators a lot of leeway, and also the teachers like it because it's more conducive to their way of practice.
So we have heard from all the constituencies?
Yes,
Oh,
yes. The committee is made up of 20 educators, and they're from special education, regular education. We have principals such as Dr. Gadd, who sits on that committee, and they have unanimously approved it this year.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
And one other thing, we can make sure that the board, the board gets the full packet, which they will, for review, and go into it more extensively if need be, on Thursday as well.
Most likely we will, just refreshing because I never remember from last year.
Right.
Just be careful because I'm not going to be there Thursday.
You're not
Gotcha.
gonna be better? No,
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm
Ann.
sorry.
Oh,
Okay. All right. So we're,
Do we have a vote from you, Ann?
did we get a vote? Okay.
So
All right.
that was
She's in favor.
unanimous, yes.
Okay, passed unanimously. All right, next we we move into informational items, and we're discussing curriculum and instruction, summer updates.
Yeah, and this is, I'm talking with Faith, I felt like it was important just sometimes to get an overview of some of the things that are happening in district that may not show up as informational items, but that I think are really important to communicate to this committee. And so one of those things I believe Jeff shared and I shared at our back to school opening meeting, and that was about the sheer number of over 200 teachers who participated in all of the optional summer learning opportunities that we presented to them. So I know you've heard a lot about the Curriculum Writing Institute, but the new piece was in the 2-day workshop that we did that was embedding social emotional learning into academics. And so we had a gentleman, an author, and again, an internationally known educator who came and provided the workshop for 2 days and really helped teachers see that social emotional learning is not we're going to stop what we're doing, pause, and teach these skills, that we really shouldn't be teaching separately. These are things that are embedded into your work when you're collaborating with other kids in doing group projects. It's about self-regulating, your behavior when you don't get a good grade on a test. It's about time management and problem solving for how do you chunk out your work. And all of those skills really need to be taught, and they need to be taught at different developmental stages, which is why we believe that it's important that we're doing this K through 12. The other piece of that was that the middle school has been working on this now for a year, and the elementary principals are interested in sort of leveling this up a little bit. We've been working on responsive classroom, for, way before I got here. I think it's been 20 years. But we want to make sure that everyone understands this concept and understands how that social emotional theory of action plays out in the day-to-day classroom. A really good example is we're going to teach, we're going to have everybody peer edit, right? And before Tony and Mary sit down, we might need to just go over the fact that, we know Mary can be very verbose, but what's a nice way to tell her that in her writing, So how do you as a kid sit down and talk to someone and give them the criticism, but also, not cut them off at the knees, because in the world of work, you have to work with people every day, and how do you do that? So it's really scaffolding all of that into the regular classroom. The other thing that we didn't get to touch on at the opening of school was the phenomenal work of our RAMs and our division leaders and our department chairs in rolling out professional development this year. We spent a lot of time working with them around the district's definition of high-quality instruction and really making sure that everyone who teaches children knows what we mean by high-quality instruction and what those expectations are. And so we began really unpacking that and getting examples, and it's something that will be a touchstone that we'll continue to come back to. So those were sort of the highlights that, you know, as the opening of school comes, and these for us are the regular day-to-day plannings that we do, but I think it's important that you guys know the kinds of training and the kinds of things that we're doing with teachers to get to those district initiatives. So that's my overview.
Marlene moment. So I know high quality instruction was weeks in the process. Can you give the 2-minute version of what some of the points are that you wanted to emphasize with the
Yeah,
teachers?
I absolutely can. So one of the things that we really wanted to stress with them is that all students can achieve grade level work, all kids, you know, and that we believe that to be true. And we want to make sure that kids coming into 11th grade are getting 11th grade, access to 11th grade material. And kids who are coming into 5th grade get access to 5th grade material. That we are not, we're providing that zone of proximal development for kids so that they are hitting productive struggle without being overwhelmed. And that productive struggle, when we struggle through something, and we all know this, right, to be true in our own, whatever it is, whatever line of work we do or in our personal lives, when you come up against something that's a challenge, that's usually when you learn the most. And sometimes it could be you just had an epic failure and you take away a lot from that, or sometimes it's a smaller thing, but you usually learn the most from when you're pushing through.
Mhm.
So I think that is our first piece, and that struggle piece is really making sure that the things that we're asking kids to do are deep learning. It's not rote, it's not drill and kill, it's not you can find the answer easily, it's problem solving, it's questioning, sometimes it's asking the questions until you can figure out for yourself what the meaning is. Not what the meaning of the things, but how is it connected to you? You have to be personally connected and be able to see how it fits in either to your life or to the problem that you're trying to solve before you can understand that. And so what we're asking teachers to do is really hard work, because you can't be doing that kind of work all day, every day, in and out. Some of the things are going to be simpler tasks, but eventually we want you to be able to really wrestle with things. So that would be the other piece. You know, we want that complex thinking. And then the other piece of that is it's too late by the time the test comes around to know that a kid struggled. So we need to have them engage in what we call responsive teaching. So I need to know all along the way, you know, where you are and what I need to do to clarify misconceptions that you may have. And if you don't think and plan about how you're going to check for understanding along the way, then you can miss it. And you don't want to get to the end of the chapter and realize that someone has missed it. So what are the exit tickets? What are the smaller check-ins along the way? What are those little mini assessments that you're doing to know how to respond? And that also is a phenomenal tap dance if, you know, you guys all get it and I don't, but the teacher needs to move ahead. So we're really trying to pull and collaborate so that teachers have each other to lean on, so they have strategies that they can go to. We're also providing, you know, supports and coaching. I think about the labs that Mary's created up at the high school for kids who need that kind of support. We're really looking at a lot of data this year, meaning like student work samples to know. With Tony and I just taught this, and his kids did really well, and my kids didn't. I want to know what Tony's doing. So let's create the time for Tony and I to work together so that all our kids can be successful. So that might have not been the 2-minute version.
No, that's
But,
fine.
but this is really what we're doing, and we believe that all kids can learn. We need to make sure the kids all believe that they can do this as well, and that the teachers believe in them. Would you add anything?
No, but you'll see that all written out in a narrative 5 slides from
Okay.
Oh, okay.
now. Which is, it's good, it's good.
Okay.
It's a good anchor, and it stems really from, so I guess I do want to add to it. It stems from district's long-time effort to be grounded in complex thinking, social emotional learning, with an overlay of some of the learning that we had through acceleration practices. So really, when you overlay the previous district strategic plan on complex thinking, social emotional learning with some of those acceleration practices, you get this picture of the belief that all students can achieve, making sure good, meaningful, meaty grade level work is in front of them, being savvy enough to know along the way how students are doing and being able to respond to that skillfully, which is hard, and providing the small scaffolds along the way that will help get them, if I'm not quite there yet, Marlene can provide me the small scaffolds that are going to help get me up to that grade level expectation. So a lot of the things that you heard in previous district strategic plans and or some of what we shared with acceleration, this is the consolidation of that into an anchor definition for us.
Okay. Thanks. And is this, let me just ask if this is something we want to revisit in a couple of months to say, you know, just to reevaluate it, and not reevaluate, but hear about the failures, successes, failures, or.
What I would love to do is to have this as a standing item on the agenda, so I can sort of talk with you about what we're doing with training, what we're doing with professional development, and where we are with an organization-wide deep understanding of high-quality instruction.
Okay. So you and, we're gonna go on, let's, how about if we talk about that?
Yeah.
We can share and I'll figure out how it comes in, we can all figure out how it would come into the agenda and be a permanent item. Okay,
And remember those curriculum and instruction updates.
yes, okay.
Seems logical.
I
I think she was just getting the blanket cozy.
Aw.
That's all. She's very quiet over there.
Okay, so next on the list is 2021-2022 Smarter Balanced
So I'm going to have
Assessment.
Kevin present all
Yeah.
of the information on that. And he has some slides that he'll share with you. And Kevin, I will share that with Ann to make it easier for her.
Yep.
Give you that, I know there were some,
So we do not know.
It's
Last
shared
one?
within the last couple hours.
okay, perfect.
In
And I
anticipation
will
of this.
share this with you so you can see it on your screen.
So we'll take just a few minutes to go over some kind of higher level overviews of Smarter Balance and NGSS assessment. Began to hear about this last week at the Opening of Schools presentation, so we'll start with that information and kind of build off of that. And a lot of the information that was shared last week was about our relative district performance. So how did Cheshire do as compared to other districts in the state? This gives us a good...
Hey, Ann,
Tracking furniture.
I think you gotta mute some background noise. Thank you. There you go.
So how Cheshire is doing relative to other districts. So you saw a version of this chart in Dr. Solon's Opening of Schools presentation that shows if you take K-12 districts in the state and do a combined rank for their math and ELA at the percent of students who are at or above goal. Those are the highest two bands under performance. We have a combined state rank of 11, and that certainly communicates that our performance relative to other districts is very strong.
Can you just go back to that?
I can. Maybe I can.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So I just want to point out here, if you look at the percentages, some of those percentages are, very tight.
Yes. And
Some
I
of these
noticed that
rankings
this-
are,
It's been around,
you
yeah, it's
know,
been-
so I think one of the board members asked a question about being ranked 5th in a previous year and being ranked 11th now, and the margin of difference, really, and you'll see when we look at the ELA performance, it's a very small different margin difference for that top tier. But regardless, in a relative sense, it shows that our district is performing at a high level. So we can look at that in a few other views. One is to look at our district reference group. So this is our English language arts performance. And this is for all of the districts in our DIRG. And you can see we're in the top tier of performing within the DIRG. And if you notice by the graph, this helps communicate what Marlene was trying to say and we just talked about. This is a very small difference between these top tier districts versus a little bit more of a distance down here. I will note that this represents all of the districts in our DIRG, including those that only go up through 6th grade. So Woodbridge stands out on there. So this is truly all of the districts in the DIRG, but what happens across the state, across our DIRG, is the intermediate grade levels typically score at a higher level of proficiency than the middle grades. So to give you information on both views on that, we've also included what this looks like in our ELA performance, just looking at districts that have grades 3 through 8. So again, in this relative standing for districts in our DIRG, we're in the top tier of those districts and very close performance to districts who are performing at the highest level. When we shift that to math, you can see that our performance is even at a higher level in the DIRG. We move up to 3rd across the whole DIRG in this scenario in math. And again, looking at just districts 3 to 8, we're 2nd position on that. So again, our relative performance in our DIRG is strong, and this year in math happens to be stronger in a relative stance than ELA. But again, you saw the small differences in ELA. One bit of information that, as we were analyzing this, we came across that I don't think we presented in this view before, but it was noticeable as we were looking at it. What you're looking at is the difference in Cheshire performance versus the state average. So this says in 2016, 17, and 18, we were just about 20 percentage points above the state average in both ELA and math. In 2018-19, you can see that that jumps up to the mid-20s. So relative to the state average, we started to make some more significant movement, and that's in line with the same kind of timeline where we moved up into that higher tier of performance. And you can see this year, we're still staying above, a good distance above that state average. And ELA is close to that 2018-19 performance in math, you'll notice, is noticeably above the state average. So at a time when districts are really working hard to get students performing at a certain level, you can see that in both ELA and math, and particularly math this year, we've really made have strong performance relative to what's going on across the state. So we haven't necessarily shown this view before, but I thought it was a good visualization of, for a long time, Cheshire has been performing high above the state average, and in the last couple administrations of it, that has really bumped up.
Kevin, is that, so it's the number Of students or scores? So
This
that
is-
we have
this is-
22%.
So let's say the
First
state
choice.
average is 50% of students make at or above goal for reading, and we have 70%.
Okay,
The number would be 20. It's the difference
Mhm.
between the state average.
okay,
That's the person over the state.
okay.
This is how far above the state average.
Yeah, I didn't, okay, thank you.
20 to 30 percentage points depending. That make sense? But this is our working definition of high quality instruction, and what I've highlighted on here is that first statement, which is we believe that all students can achieve grade level work. And it's good and important to know how Cheshire's doing relative standing to other districts. And the work that we're doing on a daily basis is not about moving up those rank points. That's a result of tying into really focusing on all students. So the next few views that we'll take a look at will be zooming in and looking at this information in a couple different ways. And I can share with you a little bit about how we use that information along the way. So the first is a breakdown by grade level performance. And again, we'll start with ELA. And what you're looking at here is a grade level breakdown of the percent of students at or above goal. The highlighted column is this year, and the columns to the right of that are each of the previous 5 administrations of this. And I'd like to zoom in for ELA on 3 pieces of this puzzle. So the first piece is the grade 3 performance. This is a group of students that we have been watching very carefully. These were our first grade learning leaders in 2020. So on the one hand, you see that on relative performance to the past, where we are typically in the upper 70s, we're kind of in the lower 70s on that front. And that's important. What's more important to me is we have a very good handle on the students who aren't yet quite making that growth. And 2nd and 3rd grade are really critical times for making sure students are where they need to be reading-wise. And if they're not quite there, that we're really applying some good supports for that. When we saw that we were trending a little bit under where we wanted to be throughout last year, Pat Castle, our language arts consultant, actually went to each building and they reviewed all 3rd grade students and some 2nd grade students where the trajectory wasn't quite where we thought it should be. And from that, we've got some, not atypical, I would say a handful of more involved plans than we typically would have that really are a result of how the last few years have been. So all within our reach in terms of helping support the students. But this is a group of students that we're keeping a close eye on. And even though the performance is a little bit lower than typical, we've got a really good handle on the students who aren't quite there yet. And I'll show you once we get to math why I think when we apply some of those strategies that that performance will start to bump up over time. The next thing I want to zoom in on is, at last year's version of this presentation, this committee had some questions around 4th grade performance, and it was really a little bit more driven by the math side of this than the ELA side, but nevertheless, that was a grade level that this committee asked some questions about performance-wise. So what you see are the 76% that's circled is last year's grade 4, this right here. Their performance on ELA, 76% at or above goal. And as we look to how they performed in 8th graders, they now have, it's 5th graders, thank you. They now have 80% of students performing in or above goal. So as a group, they are trending in the right direction. So specifically last year, there were some questions around the 4th grade, and this is an indication that they're moving in the right direction. And the last thing I'll zoom in on is our grade 7 and 8 performance. And this, like 3rd grade, is lower than our historical information, but this is a little bit different in terms of kind of where we are. we pay a lot of attention along the way to what's happening in the classroom and assessments like reading inventory along the way to make sure students are on a trajectory for meeting grade level expectations by the end of the year. And we have a handful of students who we predicted, based on what they were doing in the classroom, would meet those grade level expectations, and they did not. So this was a little bit atypical for us, because there's usually a pretty solid match between what we see in the classroom and what we see in this grade levels performance. So this is a prompt for us to go a little bit more deeply and to do a little bit of unpacking, particularly with the students who, by most of what we were looking at last year, were performing where we thought they should be, but they didn't necessarily pan out on this assessment, which is one indicator. So our division, our middle school principal and assistant principal, our division leader, Kristen Shanley, and the reading coach, Kristen Castellano, all from the shared information at this committee level before, are really taking a close look at that information so that we can, for the students, we can help support what they need to better match the grade level expectations, but also from an instructional standpoint to start to understand why what we thought was going to happen relative to this assessment didn't happen on that front. So that's one area, not unlike fourth grade last year, that we zoomed in on and said, okay, we have to do a little bit more digging. This is probably where we're going to spend some more time digging this year. If I switch over to math.
Wait, can I just point, so if just looking at your, your previous, no, if you can get rid of that graph for a minute. If you look at fifth grade 2021, you were at 84%. And then, okay, so they fell to 79. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And
81 to 69. And are you seeing in particular areas of ELA? Is it comprehension? Is it vocabulary? Is it writing? Is it all over?
I'm not going to be, I don't have the best answer for you yet on that. That's part of some of the digging that we're doing. What I would say is the very first thing that teachers are paying attention to is reading volume of just right books. So that's always a foundation. So they're taking a close look at whether the students who are not quite where we thought they would be, that's a foundation for reading. So that's the very first thing that they're looking at on that front. But I don't think if you do the breakdown of different targets for ELA, there's not anything that is immediately jumping out as different than what our historical kind of relative percentages have been. So it doesn't seem to be all of a sudden we're falling down on supporting ideas with evidence kind of thing. It doesn't seem to be anything specific target along those lines.
Historically, it has, I was looking for past emails on past SBAC scores going back to the early years, but historically the 7 and 8 kind of drop off like that.
Yes. So
Even across the
Yeah,
state.
across the state, yeah.
Yeah, through
Well,
the
not
years.
just for 1 year.
No, but through the years, you can see it as well.
And that's an intersection of a lot of different things.
Yeah.
It's students who are struggling to be at grade level. If they're not making as much progress each year, that gap gets a little bit wider. So
Mhm.
that's where we're focused on trying to fill that gap. Sometimes the nature of adolescence changes up how students are interacting with their school day. Is that a fair way to say it? So a huge chunk of the middle school teachers' efforts are to make sure that students are really staying engaged in meaningful work. So it's not atypical for middle school performance to be lower than the intermediate grades or for there to be a drop-off. But this was a little bit unanticipated, mostly because it didn't match what we were seeing throughout the year. So when that's the case, it just means that we spend a little bit more time trying to understand why. So now as we switch to math, again, the highlighted column is this year's performance, and the columns to the right are previous year's performance. I will again zoom in on 3 different things, and a couple of the grade levels will be the same. Grade 3, I'll note that they were actually our second highest performance that we've ever had on Smarter Balance. And knowing that this was a group of students who weren't quite there yet with reading, this kind of performance also gives me a confidence that we'll get there with them with reading, because we're seeing that they're really capable students in that grade level. And sometimes grade 3, because you don't have any other relative benchmark from a grouping, it's hard to know the overall nature, the overall performance of groups. Meaning, sometimes we see really strong groups coming through, and sometimes we see groups who are further away from expectations. But the performance by itself is excellent, standalone grade 3 performance, and it also gives me a good indication that we'll get there with them on the reading side of things as well. Grade 6, if we zoom in on, they actually had their highest performance ever, which is awesome. A few different things are coming into play with that. One, I think we've talked about Curriculum Writing Institute a lot. The curriculum revisions they did the prior year were pretty meaningful. And I think we're seeing the results of some of that start to play out because they made some noticeable shifts in grade 6 curriculum. We also have a process where students really can start to either cycle back to previous learning or move ahead with some new learning. And that process is starting to catch some good wind behind its sails, and I think it's yielding some results in that. So that's something to be celebrated on that front. And again, because we had talked about grade 4 last year, wanted to show that they're making movement in a positive direction on that front. So, and I continue to anticipate that that group will make positive directions on it. So that takes a grade level view. That's one of the ways that we look a little bit more closely to see what are the trends across the grade level, so that we can get in and focus our attention in some of the right areas. I also want to share just briefly the reintroduction of growth scores. So this is a really important orientation for ourselves as educators, because sometimes we really zoom in, and I just zoomed in on what's the percent of students who are at or above goal. And that's a really important indicator. But it's also important, if we are servicing the needs of all students, that all students are having the opportunity to make meaningful growth. So let's say Tony's a 4th grade student, and in 4th grade, he's a 5th grade student. In 4th grade, he met expectations on math for Smarter Balance. His individual growth goal for the next year would be probably to maintain that and also probably move up a little bit higher on that band. So the state actually sets a growth target for him. It might be 100 scale points. So Tony's growth target might be 100 scale points. As a 4th grader last year, Faith, you exceeded the expectation, and even our students who are performing at the highest levels, still we want to make growth to exceed. And you might have a growth target that keeps you in, performing at that highest level, and you might have a growth target that's around 80 points or so. I, on the other hand, was not quite there yet with my math performance, and I was just below that grade level standard. And my growth target is going to help get me either to grade level or back on track to meet grade level over a couple of years, depending on how far away I was from that grade level expectation. And I might have a growth target of 120 points. So this graph represents, in the gray, for every individual growth target, each one of our growth targets, did we make that target or not? And that's a yes or no. And we had, between 40 and 47% of students hitting those targets or above. And that's a yes or no. If Tony's was 100 and he got 99, it was a no. If he got 110, it was a yes. In the red is how much, if it was 100 points, how close on average did students get to that target? So did I get 20% of the way to that target, 40% of the way to that target, 60 or 80%. So this will carry a little bit of meaning for us this year because it's the reintroduction of this growth information. What I think is really powerful, though, is just the orientation around this growth. And I think already I've had more requests for just affirming what appropriate growth goals for our internal assessments for students are so that we can make sure that they're on track. And that conversation wasn't happening in the same way last year, and it is this year. So it's a good orientation for us. It helps us get at all students, no matter whether right now you're performing at the highest levels or you're not there yet. So I show this slide not to get in too much to the details of this, but to say now that we're back to these growth targets being available by the state, this will probably become a more important indicator for us going forward.
Is this information shared with parents, are growth goals shared with parents?
It goes on their individual score reports, which are being sent out this Friday.
Okay, and, you know, I think everyone wants to see improvement. I'll just throw out a reservation, and that is, do those growth goals, could they potentially put undue pressure on performance? And
Yeah, I don't think we ever sit down.
Students don't know the
Yeah.
goal.
So as a parent, when I get a report, when I was in the middle school, I didn't sit down my girl and say, oh, you gotta hit 20% harder, and the teacher is not sitting there with the report saying you gotta score 100 basis points more.
Yeah.
I just wonder what, but I know in the classroom, it could be teacher assigning additional reading materials, knowing that certain students need to, so I don't know where to, I haven't seen the pressure come across as getting a growth target, but I don't know if that's pressure be coming from more materials or more exercises than they would normally see in
It's
the prior
probably
year.
not more of something, it's probably a different strategy to help the student get where they need to be. Yeah.
And this is not something where we would sit down and say, oh, Marlene, you got a 2,500 on scale score on that, and you need to bump that up to 2,750 by next year. You would never go down like that, ever.
yeah, no, I can't imagine it would, but, you know, we all, I just raised the caution, because there are situations where, I mean, even without that growth score, I've seen situations, we've all seen situations where the
Sure,
pressure
sure.
is intense.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking that we raise a bunch of lazy bumpkins, but, you know, at some point, a kid is trying his hardest, and
That's actually where I think the growth idea lends itself to really good conversations about what's happening in the classroom, because students are putting in effort. To Marlene's point, it's not always more, it's effort in the right area. But this then level sets that we're all going to grow as learners, right? And this data is for us on the adult level to say, let's really think about what this kind of growth needs to be, and I want to check myself to make sure that I'm not doing something like not paying attention to our highest learners who still deserve to be growing, or not focusing on the right things for our students who need to who are fully capable of starting to work back towards kind of grade level expectations with the right kind of adult supporting teaching and instruction. So I think these are just good prompts for us to say, and if I'm not there yet as a learner, the pressure to say, hey, I need to get up, move from a level 2 to a level 3 or a level 2 or 4, this says, I'm going to keep on growing and learning. So I think it's actually a good orientation for us, and mine is spending a little bit of time on that. But I can see in some, I don't think it's a predominant kind of mindset, but there are some times when people kind of zoom in on the scores a little bit too much, and I'll just, again, echo things that we've shared in this committee before. This is one indicator for us among many, and it's a prompt to give us good information to make
I just
decisions.
want to be careful too, unless I'm mistaken. I never recall any of my teachers that are pushing a class to exceed the next aspect, testing, posting scores and all that garbage that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Agreed.
So if there's pressure, where is it coming from? I haven't seen it. That's some parents.
I'll point out too, when we go back to that slide that says we believe that all kids can achieve grade level work. You sometimes will have the, well, all, because, you know, these kids are in my class, and I think what's powerful is when a teacher sees their growth scores for their students, and we have teachers who have 97% of their students achieving their growth target, and they have a very diverse group of learners in their room. And that shows us, again, what is that teacher doing? Because they're really being successful with everyone. Let's get in, let's watch, let's see, let's have them mentor our new teachers. So it gives us some of that type of information.
And being this is the back, I know some parents don't want their kids taking tests.
Yeah.
Do we know the percentage of
Our
students
percent
that
rates were between 97 and 98%.
They're still pretty high.
Yeah.
So another lens, again, with that mindset of all students, is to think about the performance of just that, all of our students. So this says high needs. The state defines students who would be in a high needs category as three things: either students with disabilities, students whose families may qualify for free and reduced lunch, and students who are multilingual learners or English learners. So again, at last week's Opening of Schools presentation, Dr. Solon shared on a relative stance. One particular set are students with disabilities. Their performance in the state and across the state are students who with disabilities are ranked 12th in the state for their performance. So again, in a relative sense, this shows really strong performance. We can look at that another way by separating out, and we're often doing this, to the students who are at or above, who are not considered high needs, and the students who are at or above, who are considered high needs. And you can see that we have approximately 50% of our students who are considered in those high need categories making the band 3 and 4. And this really helps us pay attention to the planning and instruction for this population of students. So this is powerful information to not just put it on mass, but really break it down. How are all of our students doing? And this gives us a good lens. And you can see that it looks very similar for math, just under 50% of our students with high needs performing in math. So this speaks to the kinds of supports and additional instruction and that we know that we can provide to help students get to those grade level expectations. So it's important sometimes to break down to really see where our instructional focus ought to be. Go ahead. No? You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to shift a little bit briefly to next generation science. And again, this is in grades 5, 8, and 11. So unlike ESPA, that is every year, it's once every 3 years. And our relative district performance in the DIRG is in the top half of the DIRG, but not yet in that top tier. Again, when we look at school district, I will say this is up a couple spots from where we were the last time. So we were just under that top half the last time that we had this, and we had moved up a couple spots. But this is an area where we'll keep on working on that front. And again, this is the same DIRG information, but just districts who have these grade levels. So we're not looking at Woodbridge and so on. When we break that down by grade level performance, you can see our trends do match the state trends, where we have the lower grade level, the higher performance. So a couple of things about science that we anticipate will help us really start to get some traction and move in a positive direction. One is, we've shared with this committee multiple times, in 2019-20, we started a relationship with the Connecticut Science Center. That lasted until we got to COVID. We put that on pause. We did not do any of that work in the 2021 school year. We restarted that relationship last year, and that looked like doing things like lesson analysis and study and observation at the high school and at the middle school, some curriculum development through our RAMs at the elementary school. And one of the things that I think is important to note is science was writing new curriculum for the first time in this year's Curriculum Writing Institute, because we were trying to provide enough of that training ahead of them diving into curriculum writing. So this year, there will be our teachers of science will be implementing new units in each of the grade level bands. And we actually were just on a call today with the Connecticut Science Center for that continued support that I think will look a lot like coaching individual teachers on that front. So in our trajectory of kind of science development, we hit that pause button. We actually didn't write science in the first year of CWI because we wanted everybody to readiness to write in a way that was going to really be aligned to the NGSS standards. So I'm anticipating some positive movement on this going forward.
Absolutely.
Mary, did you want to say anything on that?
No, I think what you're saying is absolutely right, and I think the test, the first year was really a pilot year. The second year was mid-COVID, so I think the movement to really deepen that relationship with the Science Center and keep a focus on lesson development and also on instructional practices and really analyzing the data and student performance so that teachers can, in real time, say, ooh, this concept was complicated for you, let me go back and address it. That's really part and parcel of what we're doing with a focus on math and science at the high school, and teacher teams and curriculum development.
So, just a quick
Yeah.
observation. So the 1920, 2021, 2021, obviously scores dropped. For grade 11, I'm still that one thing. I mean, how much of this do we think is related to the COVID impact? Because that was, 1920 was really the year that started 2021 and trying to recruit that, and then you have the new standards. That's why how much of this was
Sure.
related to some of that.
And when you're testing on 3 years' worth of standards in one assessment, some of that impact can be compounded.
Well, I remember that was brought up when this was being implemented, so it just seems, I'm not sure we have a accurate, well, it's accurate, but you wonder what could have been if things were normal.
I agree. And
Yeah, I think this coming will give us a much better
Yeah.
picture.
so I'll end with really kind of two messages from this overview. One, in a relative perspective, we're performing very well, whether that's against the DERB, whether it's against the state, we have strong performance. So that's an important piece. And the rest of the views on this information are just a top-level overview of how we use this information to go plan with principals, teacher leaders like our department chairs, division leaders, our coaches and our RAMs, and the teachers themselves to really get at the needs of all students. And this is one indicator among many that we use, but it does give us some good information. So I'll leave it with that our work really is anchored in that very first sentence on here is we believe all students are capable of doing some pretty meaningful things. So.
So is,
No, I was waiting for you.
NGSS is national, isn't it? Or is it just,
It's required in Connecticut. Other states may be doing that, but it's our required assessment here.
okay, and do we know those other states, and are we able to look at ourselves in relation to them? I mean, it's wonderful to see how we're doing with the DERB, but it would be interesting to see how we're doing with other states that do the NGSS, and
I honestly do not know if we have any national data and how even states that use an NGSS aligned assessment, I don't know if it's exactly the same.
so it's not,
And-
it's not a nationally standardized, in other words, it's not
Not everybody.
standardized in every state. I know not
Correct.
every state does it, but
For
those
all the
states that
to
do
adopt,
it, it may not be
I believe that's accurate, but
So we've got 44 states and the District of Columbia that have adopted the NGSS standards. I don't know how many states administer this particular version of the test.
yeah.
It's just a thought, and I guess, going back, and actually, I looked at 11th grade and was kind of encouraged, because even though we took that big hit from 1819 to 2021, we're at least stabilized, it looks like we're at least stabilizing. It was the 8th grade that kind of jumped out. And what it was a big drop, and I don't know if you want to go back, but what
Ken,
any ideas, thoughts on that? I mean, that was a, 4-point drop for,
Quite a few.
yeah.
quite a few. Again, I don't have a perfect answer for any of that. It does match some of what we saw with that grade level across different assessments.
Okay,
So that's not quite where we want to be with that.
okay.
The one I was gonna make, probably 10 minutes ago, was the SBAC math scores in grade 8 was 58%.
That falls in a similar category to what
Mhm.
Faye said. That took a drop previous year. It was similar to.
Yeah, you have to go back, I saw the trend. The reason I bring it up is, that was that 8th grade at that point in time. Now they're in high school.
Mhm.
And the only thing I can wonder is, if there were cohorts or bands of students that were not proficient or at level or at high needs, and they're a little behind going to high school, that's gonna affect them, I think, right, going fast. So I think about that stuff, because
Yeah.
I know we're now looking
Me
at,
too.
now this current grade 8, obviously, you're
Yeah.
learning, so they'll benefit from some improvements. I just,
So I don't know if it's
I wonder.
any helpful information, but that exact conversation was on a meeting with myself, Marlene, Lisa Bernardi, high school
I'm sure you have.
Tom Spelling, who's the division leader, and Alicia Norway, to really look at that transition to 8th and 9th grade. I will say Lisa Bernardi at the high school has a really good handle on how that early performance from as early as 5th grade on
Absolutely.
plays out over time for students, and she's got a really good handle on that, which means that we can kind of plan and say, well, when we see students kind of trending in this way, and this is their course pathway, this is kind of the results that we get. What can we change about the course itself and the course pathways to make sure that that doesn't keep on? So she's a really good handle on that, and I feel comfortable knowing that that's on our radar. So that very question that you're talking about is I think the next Thursday meeting for us.
Does this doesn't indicate that they're not, does this qualify as grade level? Go back, your objective is every student can achieve grade level. Does this match your objective?
Meeting where we want to be. We're not where we
No,
want to be.
and you've just said
Right.
you're not where you want to be, but I guess, I had
This-
to ask this.
These assessments are one good indicator of whether a student is demonstrating grade level work.
Mhm.
It's not the only information we have. We have a lot of other ways that students can demonstrate that in addition. But
Yeah, it does, it
It's,
is easy to get just
Yeah,
four-sided on this, and.
that's where my head is at too. I have to remind myself, this is the NGSS standard. There's the SBAC standard, and then there's obviously all of that feeding to the students that they in the class when that matters. And so I try not to get too focused on these scores. Again, there's more of a benchmark, an indicator, see the trend, but these are not the tell-all.
It's
Be all.
it's not the tell-all be all, but it gives us the right kind of prompts
Yeah.
to go ask the right kind of questions, to go take a little bit deeper, to go take a look at how well we're aligned with the standards. So it's where it's not the end all be all. It gives us good information.
No, I like the fact that it's prompting you to, that makes sense. Yeah, I believe that.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have for
That's it?
that. Oh,
Geez, you sound like I am with Jeff, the superintendent.
No, I thought that was an excellent overview. I did.
It was very thorough.
thank you.
Hot seat, hot seat.
It was very well done. Very well done.
All right, now we move on to the next one, the
Yes.
SAT.
You're going to go low tech.
We're
So
gonna
I'm
go
giving
low
you
tech.
hard copies.
I saw
Yay,
that.
thank
I'm giving you
you.
hard copy paper. And just to dovetail with what Kevin was saying, the SAT is one data point on one day. We do utilize PSAT data and ESPA data to look at where students are going into the assessment, and beginning with the 2020, I believe the 1920 school year, that was when our ninth graders began taking the PSAT, so we have that nice cohort data.
Mary, can I ask you to put on that mic so that Ann
Oh,
can
sure.
hear? Oh, is it not working?
It's not gonna.
Okay. Then you know what?
Am I far enough away to take this off?
No, here, we'll just.
I'm okay.
Are you sure?
I'm,
I'm
thank
fine,
you, but
yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
This might help. Okay, I'm staying far away, and I will breathe in, I won't breathe out.
Just don't breathe.
I can do that.
Talking hold your
I'll go really fast. So again, this is one point in time. I am. I'll take you through just the first slide is really about the first two slides are what each test measures. So the math test, of course, looks at multiple choice options for students, or multiple choice questions for students and student-produced responses. You can use a calculator in one section, you may not use a calculator in the other. In evidence-based reading and writing, you are looking at multi-paragraph passages. I will say in both assessments, reading and close reading plays a huge role in both tests. That's a cross-cutting skill that we've been talking a lot about in our instructional leadership team. And for students to understand each kind of question, they need to be able to read deeply, and they also need to be able to understand the multiple vocabulary choices that describe certain phenomena that the question is asking them to address and to understand. So the big picture data story is the third page, and I've given you from 17-18.
Did that for Ann?
I did.
Oh, you did.
From 17-18 to 21-22. And of course, 19-20 is not there. Starting back in 17-18, what the chart will show you is the total number of students, the total number tested, the percent for participation. What I find interesting is that the 21-22, our participation
It's
just
going
really,
up, yeah.
Yeah, it's going up,
That's interesting.
which is interesting. Our average math score has been in the 500s. You'll see the dip in 2021, but we're fairly flat, I would say. Our performance stays fairly consistent from 17-18 to 21-22, and that's similar for the evidence-based reading and writing score. ERW is evidence-based reading and writing, and our scores have been similar, again with a minor dip in 2021. Our Connecticut rankings have also been similar. We were in a much different place actually in 17-18 and have remained pretty consistent since. Is that where we want to be? That's the question you were asking before, right? We want to see some improvement, but again, this is a one-time test for the SAT result. However, the skills and the standards that are measured are aligned to our curricula in both English and math courses. And we do pay quite a bit of attention to our equity. On the 2022 test, so last year's test, this isn't in the slides, but I'll just share it with you. 57% of identified students were able to make 20 or more points of growth from the PSAT to the SAT, and 67% of non-identified students made that 20% growth. So our identified students and our non-identified students are, the identified are lagging a little bit behind, but by 10 percentage points. It's not as though we have an enormous gulf. Would prefer to see no gulf at all, but that's encouraging. So our percent at CRB, which is College Readiness Benchmark, and the scores are below. You would need to have a score of 530 for math and a score of 480 for reading. 54% met that in 22, which was a good improvement, a welcome improvement from the dip in 2021. But we'd like to see our scores back around where we were in 18-19 and certainly exceed that. Same thing for evidence-based reading and writing. We're typically in the 80s, and we'd like to see our scores head in that direction as well. So how are we going to do that? The last slide speaks to a lot of what Kevin was talking about, our continued focus on alignment between standards and assessments. So what are those core standards, which we really got very focused on through the pandemic. That acceleration work that we did continues, and there are consistent through lines and threads. We focused on what are our priority standards. Then the following year, which was last year, we focused deeply on how do you scaffold for students who maybe aren't making that 20-point increase from PSAT to SAT. How do you support them? What shifts in the curriculum need to happen? Do we need to teach something at this time rather than at that time? Do we need to spend more time here rather than there? So we're looking deeply at those strands, both in mathematics and in evidence-based reading and writing. Increased support of teacher teams. Our PLCs now meet during the school day. The 6th class is a combination of direct student support and teacher collaboration time. So instead of having just one PLC meeting a month where you can discuss data and how your students are progressing and share strategies, and maybe during PD days, we now have a weekly system where teachers are able to collaborate, which is huge. And we're spending, the administrators and leadership team are spending more time in those PLCs this year to support and help channel resources, especially we're keeping a focus on STEM, on math and science this year. And that the increased collaboration time for teachers. One piece of the puzzle that I'm not looking at, none of us are looking at as a cause, it's just a piece to be aware of. Colleges are making SAT testing and ACT testing optional. And that's continuing into this application year. So the list of colleges that aren't looking at them is extensive.
Yeah,
It is extensive. It's more the rule rather than the exception. So part of our challenge is how do we help our students understand that this is still important? Because what you want is you want your school to have a strong showing statewide, because that also supports you as you make applications, right? And how we stack up in comparison to other districts it remains important. So we don't want students to not take it seriously, but I think we also have to be reminded that it is one test, one data point in time, but it is a measure of our standards and our curriculum.
Couple questions. One is the scores on the big picture. Is that the best SAT scores the student has? Well, sometimes students take it multiple times.
This is only the SAT school.
Okay.
So student scores, if you super score, you can have multiple opportunities to take it. So we are measuring that one day. We aren't measuring, and we're measuring from the PSAT to the SAT for our internal work. Students, though, can take it multiple times. When we offer the SAT on Saturdays at the high school. So
one thing
you could see that.
Yeah, and you'll see individual students that take the scores. And so I know I have no way to quantify this. It's just parents talking to parents, which have kids that have the school system together, similar grades. And so both my daughters, they both felt they knew the SAT content fairly well. They were just terrible at time management and test taking. So the first time, I think my oldest, she did pretty, better than I could do an SAT the first time around, but she wasn't happy with it. She took it again, and got the same score, we finally got her some coaching locally, and it went up. And I don't know how much that plays a role in relieving students' anxiety and preparing for a test.
The more
Tips, techniques,
The more we
practice.
embed those kinds of questions, those styles of questions into our own assessments, the better, which we're looking at this year. Not to teach to a test, but the measure of the skill set is flexibility. And that's what I was talking about regarding vocabulary. You will have a typical question in your class, and then it will be worded in a very different way.
Yeah,
And so how do we help students to see the multiple ways the same concept can be asked? And that's where the reading piece comes in, where we're saying that that's a significant.
And the last thing, yeah, in the colleges that are, it is, to me, it feels like the last few years, that list has just exponentially grown. And I almost felt going through this process like they, once they got my daughter's transcripts, that was it for them. Yeah, they weren't really looking that much harder at SAT scores. Which, and again, to your point, I wonder how much that plays a role in, not, I'm sure students take it seriously, but, you know, it's not like several years ago, you know, you had to get 1,200 or higher to be considered at school. Whereas now, you don't have to have that and have, you know, good grades, show progress, and you get in. It's a safety net, I think, in the mindset of students. Again, I don't know how that plays into this.
That's why we're just kind of, that's a piece.
Yeah,
It's
but-
just a piece.
I'm just ecstatic to see that 99% participated
Yeah. I
last
know.
year.
Mhm.
That's telling.
Well, I mean, it is, unless you say that, you know, the importance of the SAT is waning, but we've got
Not
a
for us.
90, okay, I was gonna say it, a 99% rate, or are they all signing up to take it and then just kind of blowing it off when they get in there? I mean, is there is that attitude coming?
I would really have no way of knowing that, but what we, but what we
I know, how would you, other than,
what we do, our teachers are just talking to kids about the importance, and that just take it seriously, and this is why. These skills are, it's predictive of your success rate in college. And they are predictive. So that cut score represents getting a 75% or better in an equivalent college course. So that's what that number means. A 530 for math means you would walk into any college course and expect to be able to get a C at that college level.
and 480 is considered
Same
a
thing
C?
for English, because there are different, there's different content associated with that, and more students would be able to perform at that C range. That's, again, the metrics of exactly how they determine that is, I am not a psychometrician. I can say it, can I spell it? That's it. But that's what those scores represent,
Okay.
those cut scores. And it's a norm
I have a-
based test.
I have a quick comment.
Yeah, go, yeah.
Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that we now give that test for free? Because we've made it part of our assessments?
Take it, see how I do.
Take it,
and
see
then
how
I'll
I
take
do,
it
and then, yeah.
For real later.
Yeah. It's probably a combination, it's probably there's a strong combination of all. I think that can work both ways, because the fact that we administer it in school also indicates the importance
Sure.
of the assessment. So it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Well, the more, and we all know that the larger your pool, and in this case, you've gone from 90, you've gained 5%. Now granted, you have fewer students taking it, but your overall percentage is larger, and so your scores are going to, should come down, you know, just because essentially you're pulling in kids who normally wouldn't, who in 17, 18 probably wouldn't have taken it anyway. Do you see what,
Yeah.
we all know that, so, but you are also being smart about it, not looking for excuses or, you know, these outside factors that that may be,
Absolutely.
you are examining what's going on with the program and,
Absolutely.
so, looking for,
And how we can support them.
Yeah,
yeah.
curious to how this year works out.
Yeah, me too.
Very hopeful.
Me too.
Train on trends operate, so.
And I think there's an extraordinary amount of digging into this data that's happening behind the scenes. I think Lisa Bernabe, like Kevin was alluding to before, has a significant handle on where students are coming from and what the pathways for math are. Having seen her professional development and the work that we did before that, in combination with the math lab and the way she structured the collaboration time, I think there's no place to go but up with this.
Any other questions?
No,
All right, that's good.
I'm good.
Thank you.
And last item on the agenda is just a report on an out-of-state trip to Disney.
Yes, and I'm going to turn it
World.
over to Mary because that is one of her teachers who has requested the trip.
Just get there.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is going to Disney ×2. The students did this last year. They found it an extremely meaningful experience. They worked with the Disney Imagineers. Several of the students have looked at this as a potential career pathway. So it's really exciting, and the fact that it links so well to our popular culture class, it really showcases how we perceive our own society and our own culture through these imaginative movies and stories. So, but they also see what's behind the scenes, and that it's not, the end product is a really complicated and highly technical process. So the one wrinkle in this is they would be leaving earlier, which would mean they would be missing, I believe, 2 days of school. And so I think that's the consideration, but the benefit is profound. It's really profound. And the students absolutely loved it last year. It was very well attended.
Yeah, so they were this the 16th and 17th.
It is around the President's Weekend.
It is.
right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's absolutely educational.
Do you find that the students, that most students sign up for this because of some way they are interested in the arts, drama,
And do, creating
Illustrating.
animation,
Animation,
animated
yeah. Oh, yeah.
films. And some have the tech aspect,
Yeah.
some write, and they want to understand the trajectory of the storyline. The hero's journey is a really deep concept, and certainly in literature, and in the literature that we teach, it's an anchor concept. So there are many layers. There are many layers, including taking a look at how our culture has emerged and transformed through the lens of Disney over the years.
I just chuckle because I know, folks that don't read what this is. They hear a Disney trip, they're going on vacation. It's a working vacation, for sure. Especially
Absolutely.
that place, there's a lot going on there.
They were.
Just trying to get there is a full-time job. I'm here.
Sounds fun. Are any scholarships available that we know of, or how are we? I just see the parents are funding. Do we?
The parents fund it. We've always worked that if we, where there's a will, we'll find a way. That if we have students who really want to go, we can look at figuring out how to support that through student activity accounts. If there's a surplus, we can certainly look at how that can support students.
It reminds us, has the Cheshire Education Foundation ever contributed this to field trips?
I don't know historically if they've done that for field trips. I believe it is typically I believe it's typically in a program that's going to run.
In the school system, yes, so I'm just curious.
Has your PTO ever donated to anything like that?
They have,
Okay.
and they're open to that.
Good. Okay. And any comments? Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of the agenda, so, guess we have nothing else
Do we
to.
need to vote on this at this time, or not?
No, this is informational
Okay.
only because it's out of state government.
It's not gonna- Okay, so, anyone, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn. Unless Ann beat me to it.
No, Ann didn't beat you to it.
Usually
Ann,
she
do we
does.
have a second?
I already wrote this.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor, aye.
Change it.